Matthew 13. That same day Jesus went out of the house and sat by the lake. Such large crowds gathered around him that he got into a boat and sat in it, while all the people stood on the shore.
All right, so I'm re-recording this chapter because I learned something that I have to share a little bit later in the chapter, and you'll understand it when you get there. But here we have Jesus being followed by huge multitudes of people, and he has to address them in some way. Now, Jesus could have said, y'all just need to get out of here. I know a lot of you have bad hearts, but he doesn't do that. He talks to them, but he talks to them in such a way that he comes across as gracious and loving and kind, but at the same time, he can give a message to his chosen people, and the rest don't feel rejected or despised in any way.
Then he told them many things in parables, saying, A farmer went out to sow his seed. As he was scattering the seed, some fell along the path, and the birds came and ate it up. Some fell on rocky places, where it did not have much soil. It sprang up quickly because the soil was shallow. But when the sun came up, the plants were scorched, and they withered because they had no root. Other seed fell among thorns, which grew up and choked the plants. Still other seed fell on good soil, where it produced a crop 100, 60, or 30 times what was sown. Whoever has ears, let them hear.
All right, so when Jesus says, whoever has ears, let them hear, I wonder what he really meant by that. Because I know he's about to explain how, or the reason why he spoke in parables was to reveal secrets to some, but not to others. So it's not simply about whoever has physical ears on the side of your head, you should hear those sounds coming out of my mouth. I think what he's saying is, whoever has a soft heart, understand what I'm saying. So in other words, he's saying right to the faces of those who refuse to believe and understand and hear that I'm speaking in a way that you don't understand it.
The disciples came to him and asked, Why do you speak to the people in parables? He replied, Because the knowledge of the secrets of the kingdom of heaven has been given to you, but not to them. Whoever has will be given more, and they will have an abundance.
Now, I don't know if Jesus is, this them, I guess pronoun them, could be applied to every single individual in the multitudes except the apostles. I imagine that there were at least some faithful followers in the multitudes besides the 12 apostles. I don't even know. I guess he had the 12 with him at this point. So I don't think he's saying every individual in the multitudes, it has not been given for them to understand, but just whichever ones in the multitudes that were not saved or not in God's elect were not intended to understand the parables. Probably more didn't understand it than did understand it. But
whoever does not have, even what they have will be taken from them.
I know. See, I believe a lot of people have a hard time believing what the Bible is saying right here, what Jesus himself is saying. He says, to some it is given to know the secrets of the kingdom of heaven, and to others it is not given. In other words, I choose, or Jesus chose to reveal truth to some, and he chose to refuse knowledge to others. It's not simply exclusively the will of man that decides whether you understand the secrets of the knowledge of the kingdom of heaven or not. It is a gift of grace that God allows you to understand anything. And he says, I speak this way so that some, those who are my elite and chosen children, I can give the sense and understanding to them, but to others, maybe even the multitudes, I refuse to reveal the truth to them. That's why I'm speaking in parables, because I don't want them to understand. They are not the ones who are supposed to understand what I'm saying. And he says, not only that, but whoever has, I'm going to give more, and whoever does not have, I'm going to take away whatever they have. So he said, well, that's so mean. Oh, I just can't serve a God that's that mean. Well, then you can't serve the real God. Now, I don't think that's mean. I think that is his prerogative to do whatever he wants. He is God. He is sovereign. He's the creator. He's the giver of every good and perfect gift. He's the sustainer of life. And he has the right to do whatever he wants. If you think it's mean, then you don't understand the sovereignty of God, and you don't, we should be able to praise God for his sovereignty and his power and control over all things, even over the will of man. We should praise God for that. But instead, some people rebuke God for his sovereignty and say, God, I can't stand the fact that you overpower the will of man, that you blind some people and you open the eyes of others. That's so mean of you. Well, if you view God that way, if you think it's mean of God to be sovereign, then you think too highly of yourself. Then you're glorifying yourself and saying, I am the one who should be sovereign. I'm the one who should decide what is fair and just and right, not God. So you need to humble yourself and exalt and praise and give thanks to God for his sovereignty and allow him to rule his kingdom the way he chooses to rule it.
This is why I speak to them in parables. Though seeing, they do not see. Though hearing, they do not hear or understand. In them is fulfilled the prophecy of Isaiah. You will be ever hearing, but never understanding. You will be ever seeing, but never perceiving. For this people's heart has become calloused. They hardly hear with their ears, and they have closed their eyes. Otherwise they might see with their eyes, hear with their ears, understand with their hearts, and turn, and I would heal them.
All right, so now this prophecy of Isaiah could certainly give the impression that it is completely up to these people to choose to do whatever they want to do. They could either open their eyes or their hearts, whatever they want to do. But we could line up multitudes of scriptures, and even this own passage here that we just read, verse 11, it says, to some it is given to know, to others it is not given to know. And the reason I speak in parables is so some people won't understand. So there's actually a duality of wills, but God's will is always sovereign. God can override the will of man at any point and any time and not be unjust or unkind or mean because he does it, because he has a purpose to serve. He has a will to carry out. But in a sense, man does have the ability to make choices. Certainly man has the ability to make choices, and certainly bears responsibility of whatever choices he makes. But I don't think that man makes choices completely independent of the will of God. Whatever choices man makes are still under the subjection to the authority of the sovereignty of God in carrying out God's will. God's will be done no matter what. From our perspective, it feels like we are in complete control of all of our choices, that we can choose to do this or that without any hindrance or obligation by an outside force. It feels like that. You think that you have the ability to make whatever choices you want and go whichever direction you want. But the Bible teaches otherwise. It says it is not in man who walks to direct his own steps. We can't take one step unless God tells us where to put our foot. Now, we feel like we're walking all by ourselves. We feel like we're putting one foot in front of the other. But it is not in man who walks to direct his own steps. We cannot do things without the influence of God. In fact, you can't even breathe unless God gives you the ability to breathe. Your heart's not going to beat unless God makes your heart beat. So whatever choice you make is not completely independent of the will of God.
But blessed are your eyes because they see, and your ears because they hear.
Now, the way I understand that, it says, blessed are your eyes, but I would say you should give thanks to God because God opened your eyes. I think that's what that's saying. You should give thanks to God because your eyes have been opened and your ears can hear. You should praise God for that.
For truly I tell you, many prophets and righteous people long to see what you see, but did not see it, and to hear what you hear, but did not hear it.
Now, this verse 17 says, for truly I tell you, many prophets and righteous people long to see what you see and hear what you hear. So I really think almost all of the Old Testament, almost every one of the prophets were prophesying about the things that these apostles were experiencing in their life. The whole purpose of the Old Covenant was to point to Jesus. All the prophecies of the Old Covenant, all the symbols and rituals and traditions and customs and festivals and feast days and rituals, all the temple, the tabernacle, the emblems in the tabernacle and the temple, all that pointed to Jesus. They all longed to see and hear the things that the apostles were experiencing. So Jesus is saying that he is the fulfillment of prophecy. And many people wanted to see what these apostles were seeing.
Listen then to what the parable of the sower means. When anyone hears the message about the kingdom and does not understand it, the evil one comes and snatches away what was sown in their heart. This is the seed sown along the path.
So he's explaining the parable of the sower, and he's giving the understanding. Maybe they didn't understand it simply by the parable. It seems fairly easy to understand, but maybe it's because, I guess, hindsight is 20/20. I don't know how I would have perceived it if I was the one listening to it for the first time. But he's talking about when someone hears the message of the kingdom, when someone hears about the church, about Christ ruling in his kingdom, everlasting, eternal kingdom that has no end, in the church that was about to come, because Jesus and John the Baptist said over and over, the kingdom of heaven is at hand. The kingdom was coming. It was about to be established.
The seed falling on rocky ground refers to someone who hears the word and at once receives it with joy. But since they have no root, they last only a short time. When trouble or persecution comes because of the word, they quickly fall away.
So that's people that, yes, the message sounds good. It certainly sounds good for Jews to be enrolled into the kingdom. Not Jews, Gentiles. For Gentiles to be rolled into the kingdom, that sounds great. For Gentiles anyway. Jews, I don't think, really like that as much, because Jews wanted to be elite. They wanted to be God's only chosen people, for the most part.
The seed falling among the thorns refers to someone who hears the word, but the worries of this life and the deceitfulness of wealth choke the word, making it unfruitful.
No, I think this is beginning. Originally, I recorded this with the American Standard Version, and it uses the word world many times when it really shouldn't. This version, let's see, where are we? Verse 23. Oh, it's the NIV. Does a much better job of translating the word world. Because here, I think in verse 22, it said, the other version said the cares of the world, when this version says the worries of this life. And that makes much more sense. Now, I guess it makes that particular one really doesn't matter that much. The worries of this life versus the cares of the world seem to be essentially the same thing. It makes the same sense to me. But it makes a much bigger difference, the way it's used a little bit later in this chapter.
But the seed falling on good soil refers to someone who hears the word and understands it. This is the one who produces a crop yielding 100, 60, or 30 times what was sown.
All right, so even on the good soil, some produce 60, 30, or 100 times. So if you want to talk about what you think is fair, or what you think, if you think that you're qualified to judge another person, you say, well, oh, look how much work this person has done in the kingdom. He is surely saved by God. Look at all he's a preacher. He does all these things in the kingdom. And just look at this other person. He's just a common man. He don't even preach. Look at me. Every time I try to talk to anybody about the Bible, it just causes conflict and fights and arguments, and it's like nobody wants to. It seems like there's no good fruit coming from it, but I believe there is, even though I don't see it. But you can't judge someone like that. You cannot think based on what you see this person. You think this person is more righteous than another, and you just look at all the sexual abuse in the church, the Catholic Church, and I've heard a lot from the Southern Baptists recently, and it's probably in every single denomination, including the one that you go to, because people are sinful and do sinful things often. You can't look and, maybe the Pope himself is completely corrupted by sexual scandals and things like that. I'm not accusing, I'm just using a hypothetical situation. You never know what's going on in that person's life. In fact, so just don't think that you can judge somebody. Don't think that you can decide that this person is viewed in higher esteem than that person in God's eyes. You can't see through God's eyes, so don't do that. Some produce more than others, and some are completely corrupted and you don't even know it.
Jesus told them another parable. The kingdom of heaven is like a man who sowed good seed in his field. But while everyone was sleeping, his enemy came and sowed weeds among the wheat and went away. When the wheat sprouted and formed heads, then the weeds also appeared. The owner's servants came to him and said, "Sir, didn't you sow good seed in your field? Where then did the weeds come from?" "An enemy did this," he replied. The servants asked him, "Do you want us to go and pull them up?" "No," he answered, "because while you are pulling the weeds, you may uproot the wheat with them. Let both grow together until the harvest. At that time, I will tell the harvesters, first collect the weeds and tie them in bundles to be burned. Then gather the wheat and bring it into my barn."
Okay, so these are two different parables, but they're both about a sower, one who sows seed. So the first one is a parable about the different types of soil, or the different locations where the seed falls, either in the path or among the thorns or on good soil. But this one is about someone who came along behind the farmer and sowed weeds into the wheat. So it's the parable of the tares, the weeds of the tares. So one is about the soil and one is a little more about the weeds.
He told them another parable. The kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed, which a man took and planted in his field. Though it is the smallest of all seeds, yet when it grows, it is the largest of garden plants and becomes a tree, so that the birds come and perch in its branches. He told them still another parable. The kingdom of heaven is like yeast that a woman took and mixed into about 60 pounds of flour until it worked all through the dough. Jesus spoke all these things to the crowd in parables. He did not say anything to them without using a parable. So was fulfilled what was spoken through the prophet. I will open my mouth in parables. I will utter things hidden since the creation of the world.
All right, so here's another use of the word world, and this is the reason why I'm re-recording this chapter. It's all about the interpretation of the word world, or actually the two Greek words that are used in this chapter are kosmos and aion, or aion. Cosmos usually means, when it uses that word, it usually means the creation, the space and earth, heaven and earth, creation. But when it uses the word aion, it usually should be translated, as it is in this version, age. And it makes a huge difference. And if you don't understand these two different words are being used, you will certainly get a different picture of what you think Jesus is saying. So here he says, I will utter things hidden since the creation of the world. Obviously, that's the cosmos. That's the word that is used there. The Greek word is kosmos. I will utter things hidden since the creation of the cosmos.
Then he left the crowd and went into the house. His disciples came to him and said, Explain to us the parable of the weeds in the field. He answered, The one who sowed the good seed is the Son of Man. The field is the world, and the good...
Now, I still struggle sometimes with the phrase Son of Man. I believe it's really a reference to the fulfillment of prophecy. I think if you go back and look at how the Son of Man is used in the Old Testament, it's used often as a prophecy about the Messiah. And so Jesus is not saying, I am just another Son of Man. He's saying, I am the Son of Man that was prophesied about in the Old Covenant.
Good seed stands for the people of the kingdom. The weeds are the people of the evil one, and the enemy who sows them is the devil. The harvest is the end of the age, and the harvesters are angels.
All right, so here is the beginning of the confusion if you read another version. This version uses it correctly. It says the harvest is the end of the age. Now, other versions say the harvest is the end of the world. And since it uses, like what verse was this up here? Verse 35, it says, I will utter things hidden since the creation of the world. And then if you, right after that, you say, the harvest is the end of the world. Well, it makes you think that we're talking about the end of creation, the utter end, the burning up of heaven and earth, the end of creation. But that's not what it's talking about. It is completely different words. One is cosmos and one is aion. So the hidden things that are being revealed since the creation of the world or now being revealed, and he's saying this harvest, when the wheat and the tares are gathered up, will be at the end of the age, not the end of the cosmos, the end of the aion. It's totally different. It's not the end of the world.
As the weeds are pulled up and burned in the fire, so it will be at the end of the age.
And again, different versions say, so it will be at the end of the world, giving you the impression that this is when the earth is burned up and destroyed. But it's not talking about that. The end of the age was the end of the Jewish age, the end of the Old Covenant and the establishment of the New Covenant, the establishment of the kingdom. That's what Jesus came preaching about. He was preaching about the coming kingdom. The kingdom of heaven is at hand. And all these parables are about the kingdom of heaven is like leaven put into wheat or whatever. It's like when someone sows seed and then the devil comes along and sows tares and weeds in your field. He's talking about the kingdom of heaven. And the kingdom is the church. The kingdom has not been established yet at this time, but it is at hand. It's about to be established. And the end of the age has not happened yet, but it is about to take place. The end of the age certainly occurred at 70 AD when Jerusalem and the temple was destroyed. God says this is the end of the age. There is now no longer a temple. There is now no longer sacrifices that will be offered. And even after Jesus offered his ultimate sacrifice, they were still able to offer sacrifices in the Jewish temple for 40 years until Jesus wiped that out. He says, nope, that is no longer what you need to do, and I'm going to make sure you understand that we're in the kingdom now by destroying the temple in Jerusalem and scattering the Jews and wiping that way of life out. It was the utter end of the world as they knew it, but it is more accurately defined as the end of the age, the end of the Jewish age, the Old Covenant.
Son of Man will send out his angels, and they will weed out of his kingdom everything that causes sin and all who do evil. They will throw them into the blazing furnace, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth.
Now, this misinterpretation of the word world also gives a misinterpretation of when the judgment would take place. The judgment is to take place at the end of the age, which was the end of the Jewish age, which was unequivocally 70 AD when the Jews were destroyed. Now, we could talk about how Jesus' sacrifice in 30 or 33 AD, what actually changed and transitioned at that time versus 70 AD. I think is more like a transition period where the kingdom was established when Jesus was resurrected. But the old covenant was not completely wiped away and abolished until 70 AD. So there was a little bit of overlap there, like 40 years.
Then the righteous will shine like the sun in the kingdom of their Father. Whoever has ears, let them hear.
Again, I think what he's saying is, whoever God has given the understanding, you should praise God for that understanding.
The kingdom of heaven is like treasure hidden in a field. When a man found it, he hid it again. And then in his joy went and sold all he had and bought that field.
Now this gave me the impression, usually we want to share the good news of the kingdom. We want other people to be saved. So this is kind of odd to me that he says the kingdom of heaven is like a treasure hidden in the field. You go hide it, and you don't want anybody else to know about it. And then you go sell all that you have so that you can have that precious thing. That's a parable of selfishness, not sharing. If you found a treasure, would anybody ever say, "Oh, I found $1 million. Let's all go share it evenly with everybody in America. That means I get like a penny." No, it's not logical. That's not the way people think. People think about, having what they desire, which is a natural selfish desire. So I just find it interesting that Jesus himself describes finding the kingdom of heaven as something that you would internalize and appreciate for yourself.
Again, the kingdom of heaven is like a merchant looking for fine pearls. When he found one of great value, he went away and sold everything he had and bought it.
So the main point might not be the selfishness. The main point is most likely the fact that you should be willing to sell everything you have for it. You should recognize the value of the kingdom of heaven as more than anything else that you could ever obtain. So no matter what you have worked for your job, your home, your cars, your retirement plan, your family, no matter what you have worked for in this life, no matter what pride you have or whatever you have obtained, it is not worth losing the kingdom of heaven. You should be willing to give up everything, even your thoughts of human sovereignty or your ability to control your own destiny or make your own choices. You should even be willing to give that up. You should completely give your life over to God and say, "You do with me what you will. Just give me the kingdom of heaven. And, wanting to be saved is a selfish thing. I want to be saved. I want to spend eternity in heaven with God and Jesus and all the saints. That's selfish. That's looking out for myself. And that's the way it should be. But it does not mean you should try to prevent other people from going to heaven because you want to go there. So that's the point that we should not gain from these parables.
Once again, the kingdom of heaven is like a net that was let down into the lake and caught all kinds of fish. When it was full, the fishermen pulled it up on the shore. Then they sat down and collected the good fish in baskets, but threw the bad away. This is how it will be at the end of the age.
All right, so it's not the end of the world, but the end of the age. And the end of age is obviously the end of the Old Covenant and the establishment of the kingdom, which was fully realized in 70 A.D.
Angels will come and separate the wicked from the righteous.
All right, so this is also talking about Judgment Day. Judgment Day is not something that we're reading about now is not something that we should view as something that is still waiting to happen in our future. Maybe after we die in a million years from now, after the earth is burned up. That's not right. This is talking about the judgment day at the end of the age. And I believe it is a similar concept where even all those who are dead that were in possibly Hades, Paradise, or Tartarus, wherever their souls were, wherever their spirits were, that they would be ultimately divided and put into their eternal locations of heaven or hell. And everybody who dies after this moment in time, which would have been the first century, the end of the age would have been fully realized in 70 A.D. So anybody who dies after 70 A.D. would instantly go to either heaven or hell. Their spirits would instantly go there. They don't go to a waiting period or a holding cell to await judgment. Judgment has already happened. All these things have been fulfilled already. And we are in the kingdom right now. And we will always be in the kingdom. If you are a kingdom, the son of the kingdom, then you will always be in the kingdom. Even after you die, you will just continue to exist in a different state in the kingdom of heaven.
And throw them into the blazing furnace, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Have you understood all these things?
All right, so there's multiple parables. There's multiple explanations. And then Jesus looks at his apostles and said, have you understood these things?
Jesus asked. Yes, they replied.
All right, so I was listening to Don K. Preston, the president of Preterist Research Institute. He has some fabulous videos. I was skeptical when I first started listening to him, but I certainly think that he makes much more sense than really anybody else I've ever heard talking about eschatology. But in Matthew chapter 24, when the apostles say, when Jesus is talking about the destruction of the temple, he says, not one stone will be left on another. And then the apostles say, tell us what will be the sign of your coming and the end of the age. So we were just talking about the end of the age in this chapter. This is chapter 13, talking about the end of the age. And in chapter 24, people today confuse the Matthew chapter 24 with the end of the world, the end of the cosmos. But it's not talking about the end of the cosmos. It's talking about the end of the age, which is the Jewish age, the Old Covenant, the establishment of the New Covenant, the abolishing of the Old Covenant. That's what he's talking about. And Jesus said, did you understand this? And the apostles said, yes. So in Matthew chapter 24, when the apostles say, give us a sign of your coming and the end of the age, they knew what they were talking about. They were talking about the end of the Jewish age. They were not talking about the burning up of earth, the destruction of time and space.
He said to them, therefore every teacher of the law who has become a disciple in the kingdom of heaven is like the owner of a house who brings out of his storeroom new treasures as well as old. When Jesus had finished these parables, he moved on from there. Coming to his hometown, he began teaching the people in their synagogue, and they were amazed. "Where did this man get this wisdom and these miraculous powers?" they asked. "Isn't this the carpenter's son? Isn't his mother's name Mary? And aren't his brothers James, Joseph, Simon, and Judas? Aren't all his sisters with us? Where then did this man get all these things?"
All right, so this is maybe one of the best verses to understand the immediate family of Jesus. It says that Joseph was a carpenter. We know Mary as the Virgin Mary. But you don't see a lot about James, Joseph, Simon, and Judas, who were his half-brothers, because Mary was all their mother, and Joseph was their father, but Joseph wasn't technically Jesus' father. So that would make them half-brothers and sisters. And he also had many sisters that we don't know the names, at least from this text. Maybe from any text. But he had a big family. He had a lot of brothers and sisters that lived in the house with him. Now, Jesus was the oldest because Jesus was the firstborn, because Mary was a virgin when he was born. So just imagine what it would be like to grow up in the house with Jesus. He's the older brother, and he's obviously special. And we have, I believe, is it the book of James or Jude? I'm failed to remember right now. But I believe the book of James is Jesus' brother that wrote it. But I don't think, the apostles were Peter, Andrew, James, and John, but I don't think that James was his brother. I think that was a different brother, or a different person.
And they took offense at him. But Jesus said to them, "A prophet is not without honor except in his own town and in his own home."
So he says a prophet is not without honor except in his own town or his own home. I don't really think that his brothers and sisters dishonored him. I think they knew who he was, that he was special, that he was the Son of God. You think Mary didn't tell the other children where Jesus came from and how he was born of a virgin, and all the special things that he did growing up? You know, when he was 12 years old, his teaching in the synagogues and all that stuff. No, I think he had plenty of honor in his own home. But this is just a general proverb, I guess is what you'd call it. People are not respected within their inner circles. And I certainly understand that.
And he did not do many miracles there because of their lack of faith.
So usually miracles increases somebody's faith, but he did not do many miracles there because of their lack of faith. Or because because it wasn't God's will that they would be people of strong faith. That would make a little more sense to me. Anyway, I'm sorry for this one being just 38 minutes. This may be the longest video I've ever done on a chapter, but I had to explain. I think it's critical. When you have a chapter that is interpreted in a wrong way, that gives a wrong concept, when it says, "This is what will happen at the end of the world," giving the impression that it's saying this will happen at the end of the cosmos or the end of the creation, whenever the sun explodes and burns up all the planets, that is a completely different concept than saying these are the things that will happen at the end of the age. And then you got all these other things that talk about what will happen at the end of the age, such as the judgment, the separating of the wheat and the tares and all that. So anyway, I hope you hung in there, and I hope you appreciated the understanding and the correct interpretation of cosmos and aion in Matthew chapter 13.